Greetings. I am here with the gentlemen of the International Toy Pod, GI Joburg. Regrettably, we only have 21 minutes to save the world. Gentlemen, please give our friends your warmest silent greeting. Thank you. To the mission. Welcome. We have 21 minutes of silent interlude. A comic with no words that defined a generation of G.I. Joe fandom, revered, imitated, transcendent. Let's start with a man who works with comic books, Robert. When did this book first find your eyes? And ultimately, how do you rate it against all time or even in the series?
The original version, issue 21, I think I discovered probably sometime in the 90s. I think Stephen had a copy of it, possibly. And it was mind-blowing. It was an entire issue with no words that still told a compelling story. And yeah, I think it definitely has been a fantastic thing that has far outlasted itself and become a really big thing in comic book history itself, I think.
Mm-hmm. Would you claim, is it the best issue in the series for you?
I haven't read every single issue ever, but I think it's definitely one of the easy ones to get through. Not bogged down with a lot of difficult to read dialogue. I think Lara Hammer, he trusted in his audience to kind of understand what was going on all the time, especially when he laid down technical terms from his years in Vietnam. And this just kind of just lays it bare. There's a story, and it works.
Stephen, you're called into duty.
Reporting for duty, sir. The question is, when did I first encounter this issue? Well, my first encounter with issue 21 wasn't actually the comic book at all. I was just listening to a podcast called GI Joe Review, and I think in about 2007 they did issue 21, and that's the first time I ever heard about it. Before that, I had no knowledge of this issue at all.
Damn, where the hell did I read it then? Sorry to interrupt.
Good question, man. That was some Mandela effect happening there. And
God damn.
where do I rate it in the GI Joe series? I think so much of its impact, at least in the story beat, comes from the reveal. And by the time I got to this issue, that reveal was ancient history. Like when I first encountered GI Joe, Storm Shadow already was a good guy. So the shock reveal was like seeing a cobra symbol on his chest. I was like, "What? He's a
Storm
bad guy once
who?
upon a time?"
We'll get
Yeah.
there,
So
Stephen. But how about you, Deadly Pencils? When did this book first find you?
I discovered issue 21 through a wonderful magazine known as Wizard. The comics magazine? They were doing, I think they were doing like a top. It was just before 2000 hit. It was like top comic books of the decade, or the top, it was like the top 50 or top 30 or something like that. And I remember seeing a GI Joe issue in there being one of the top 10 comic books ever produced up until the quote unquote new millennium. And I remember like reading about it and going, "Oh wow, the whole issue is like silent. It's like there's no speech bubbles and whatever's." And then a little later after that, they did like a bit of an expose on GI Joe the comic book, because they were talking about rebirthing the nostalgic properties. So, like Transformers was getting a new comic book. GI Joe was being picked up by Image, so Image did like a whole feature on GI Joe, and they discussed some of the backstory behind that. And I think Larry Hama was was sort of interviewed. So that's how I knew it. And the first time I read it was when it was collected in Marvel had done a really cool collection of graphic novels, and I think it's in the third one, in the third graphic novel, the third collected trade series, which I got quite early in the 2000s. So that was like the first time I read it. I think probably about 2004, maybe 2004, 2005 is when I first actually read that book.
Deadly Pencils,
Yeah.
let me interject for just 1 second. Where do you rate this comic book all time?
All time, I would say it's definitely GI Joe's most recognizable book. I think out of all of the GI Joe books ever created, It's the one single issue that stands out, that has an identity that stands out from the best. Where do I think it stands out in the overall world of comic books? Yeah, I would say it's, as a comic book, it's probably one of my top 20. Not the best issue, not the best comic I've ever read, but it's definitely in my top 20. Like,
Nicely
not to be
done.
like that guy, but yeah. you know.
Nicely done, my friend. But wait, there's more. The comic publisher Idea and Design Works, in their infinite creativity, have introduced yet a new iteration. The 40th anniversary of G.I. Joe gives us the silent interlude, but drawn by contemporary line artists familiar to the brand and several that we've crossed paths with along our G.I. Joe journey. Rob, let's start with you. Most improved page or most noteworthy page in your opinion?
I'd have to say it's the very first page. So obviously the original, it's art by Larry Harmer, Steve Leialoha did finishes, but this version of the page, because each page is by a different artist, it's by Tom Feister, and I just really like that. It sets the mood just like the original does, but it kind of sets it. It feels even more like the beginning of the story, if that makes sense. It feels more like, because of the way that we can kind of like do art so much more detailed these days. I mean, the art is exceptionally amazing in the original, but now we can kind of do more with color, and it sets the tone of the nighttime of the mission. And his like rendition of the Silent Castle, or the Destro's Castle, is absolutely fantastic. Like, he did a really good job of reproducing that original page, but making it feel more contemporary and more. The setting feels more realistic, I think.
Nice scoop. Steven?
Oh, it's gonna have to be your pal and mine, Adam Rich's page,
Hey.
where he takes all of Destro's chess pieces and gives them authentic O-ring articulation, rivets, screws, accessories. He even does some very creative work to get Scarlet to fit onto a battle stand. I thought that was quite interesting. The balance doesn't quite work, if you ask me, if I'm to be totally critical. Her foot should be on the leading edge of the stand, but I'm going to give that a pass because he does so much great work. The fidelity to the action figures is superb and really does elevate the page to be kind of intertextual. It is referencing itself. It is referencing that it is in fact a comic book taken seriously, but ultimately based on playthings. And he had to invent some customs too. Quinn and Dr. Venom. I'm especially intrigued as to how he did the quote-unquote soft goods on Dr. Venom, something that we didn't see on O-ring figures at the time. Adam had to get creative.
Nicely stated.
Yeah, I
Allow
appreciated
me.
that too. Yeah.
Cheers, Riches. I'm gonna go with and also Gary from the Motor Pod would agree with that, Stephen. I'm gonna go with Netho Diaz. He stole my heart with that cross hatching on the first frame. Pulls you right into the page. You know I love it. Purple skies. It's moody as hell. It looks dangerous. But yeah, that cross hatching pulls you right into the castle frame there, and of course it's visceral. You know, the knives right into the Cobra soldiers. As a kid, as an adult, you still feel that. Cheers, Nethos. Deadly Pencils.
Dude, I loved Robert Atkins's rendition of his page, or of the original page. And that's of course like Snake Eyes has now infiltrated, and he encounters a red ninja, and he throws a grenade at him. But what I like about it is that Robert Atkins was, as a professional, he's like smart enough to recognize that the original page is actually really great, and that you shouldn't mess with the formula too much. And he doesn't, and he does these like small little flourishes just to add a little bit of drama where he felt that it needed to be added. And I agree with his choices. I think having the reflection of the red ninja in Snake Eyes' visor, making it sort of a clearer shot, turning Snake Eyes' face around a little bit instead of it being a dead-on shot, just made it more interesting and more dynamic. And I also like what he did with the hand for the hand grenade. The way that it's it feels more like it's being thrown at you. I always felt the original had that, but it didn't quite have the impact. And I just feel like all around that, if you're going to like remaster a book, or if you're going to like redraw a book, this is how I feel you should do it. And I feel like Robert Atkins nailed it. Like, he really got it down. He's even kept a lot of the shapes and the composition for the panels pretty much on point. Like, it's spot on. It's great.
Speaking of
Concur.
points, I like the fact that the Psy now has points, whereas
yes.
the original line art seemed very rounded off, which is perhaps perspectively how a Psy would look, but it's supposed to be pointed. It needs to look dangerous, whereas in the original art, it looks like a kitchen utensil.
I'm a fan of Psy Talk, but we must move on. Let's go compare and contrast, gentlemen. What did this book show you about Larry Hama's original line art? Stephen, let's go back to you real quick.
Before we even get into the line art, I'd just like to say that this book gave me a profound appreciation for Larry's layouts. The geometric layouts that he uses of like just balancing, like 3 vertical frames balanced by a long horizontal frame, balanced by another 3 vertical frames, balanced by a long horizontal frame. He gave such a strong framework, and I feel like pages that didn't adhere strictly to Larry's layouts kind of suffered for it. Like, it's almost like a mathematical perfection. It feels like who's Alan Moore's penciler on Watchmen?
Oh, Dave Gibbons.
Dave Gibbons. It feels like Dave Gibbons' work. It's just so pleasing to look at. And the line work itself, my goodness, man. Each of these artists had a page and could take as long or as short as they felt necessary to produce their work. But if you think about the fact that back in the day, one man penciled and another man finished with an enormous time crunch, the fact that everything is this perfect, it's a monumental work. This 40th is a tribute to, it is above all else a tribute to the original. And it gave me a new appreciation
Robert?
for Larry and Steve's original work.
I think it actually doesn't get better than the original. I think a lot of people have definitely tried to do their own things. I would definitely go off what Stephen said, that the original paneling that Larry instituted in his comic book is absolutely fantastic. He chose the best moments for each panel perfectly to kind of like advance the action. And also, he's absolutely amazing at doing motion. There's a lot of motion in his panels. Like, he often does do the motion lines where you can kind of like see how their arms have come to the position that they're into in that moment. And like how fast Snake Eyes moves when he attacks the 2 troopers on the roof. There's just always incredible examples of motion and movement within his panels. And it's really fantastic. And I think the page that Paul chose was a fantastic example of someone essentially reproducing what Larry originally did, because a lot of the other pages lose that sense of motion and movement that Larry put into each panel that he produced.
Word. Paul?
Unmute. Hey, man. The thing is, like, Stephen kind of touched on it earlier, but Larry's layouts are so strong that whenever you see somebody try to deviate from it in a big way, it completely breaks and it hurts the sort of continuity of the shot. And a good example for me is the way that Scarlet is introduced when Storm Shadow cuts her sort of the bag open that she's in. That whole shot, I feel like that was I just feel like a lot of the drama is completely lost there, whereas the original packs that drama in very well. It's very like I feel like this whole comic book goes to the beat of like a really cool kind of synthwaves da da dum kind of tune, and I just feel when you look at the remake, whenever somebody breaks that layout or tries to be a little bit too dynamic with it, that it messes up that whole song in my head with this. And I say that with obviously with respect to the guys who did this because they obviously wanted to try and do something interesting with the book. And to be fair, this is the second time that it's been sort of remastered or redrawn, you know, as a sort of anthology situation. So
As
yeah,
a
I imagine some guys wanted to give something new to it. Yeah.
as a fellow appreciator of synthwave, I appreciate your words, my friend. I would echo the words of Stephen and Rob and yourself as well that I think what this book revealed to me is that Hama is a visual architect. Uh, we can probably still hike around Cobra Island if we need to. We know what the Silent Castle looks like. We may not know every hallway, but we know it pretty well, and it's because the framing. One thing I noticed is Hama rarely lets his characters escape the frame. Maybe if they're parachuting, a foot might break the plane. Possibly critical in our final question, and that is final verdict. Is the 40th anniversary comic tired, wired, or inspired to you? Scoop, let's chat you up first. Your thoughts?
I I I gotta say, I think it's tied. I think there's only so much you can do. Actually, I don't think you really can improve on the original. It's consistently so good, and I think especially something that I missed from almost every single artist that interpreted their pages in this 40th anniversary version were the emotions, especially with Scarlet. Scarlet has a lot of emotions and expressions on her faces on her pages, and I think only one or two of the artists managed to capture the emotions of the characters. Otherwise, in general, they feel very lifeless, or at least emotionless in the way that you see them on the panels in the new comic book. And I think they didn't reproduce that well enough to kind of keep the emotion going through the entire book. It's more like it's all the action, but you don't feel the people behind the motion. So I think definitely, yeah, I think it's tied. We've lost the emotion, we've lost the movement and grace of the original. You really didn't have to reproduce this. All you had to do was just reprint the original and be done with it.
Not a fan of choreography? What say you, Stephen?
Well, they had to wring a few more dollars out of issue 21, right? It's a nice bonus. If you bought the actual paper edition, it makes for a nice kind of, I suppose, an interesting lens to engage in issue 21 again. But yeah, its existence is baffling to me because, like you said, Rob, it doesn't need to exist. Like, issue 21 is a very high watermark. And I'm sure the conversation each and every one of these artists had with themselves is, why the hell am I doing this? Why am I trying to imitate what is essentially frame by frame, panel by panel, page by page perfection? So it was a very tall order, and ultimately, in the annals of history, I think this will be kind of just an oddity. You know, if I'm going to reach for issue 21 to read, it's going to be the original and not this. But it does add something, I guess. It adds a new appreciation for exactly how bloody good the original is.
Enough said. We're under 2 minutes. Deadly Pencils, your thoughts?
Ooh, dude, this is so tired. How many times are we gonna get a silent issue from GI Joe? I think this is like the 8th time that they've done this. Never mind just taking issue 21. It's just that they always revisit this, revisit what has become a trope now, and it's really annoying. Considering that the first one is actually an accident, and a beautiful one at that. It's an accidental masterpiece, and I think anybody trying to recapture that fire is just trying to make a remake. Is just trying to do a remake of an 80s show in the late 2000s without having much care or understanding for what made the original great. I also do want to say the only thing, there's one small glimmer here. That's definitely worth mentioning. There's a penciled page for the last page of this book. I don't know who the artist is. I can't get his name right now.
I got
But
your back.
I would say that one was that's the only page that I think could have actually been a true improvement over the original, because Larry Hama's original vertical 3-panel I didn't think was it's strong, but I didn't think
30
it was that
seconds.
strong.
Let me close
Cool.
out. I echo the words of an artist, Paul. I will say this. I will say it's wired because it's hard as hell to get a bunch of artists to work together to get a book done. We all know. But respect the artists. I enjoyed seeing their work. I do think some of them turned up, and I did enjoy that. Gentlemen, I feel like we've had a nice silent interlude, don't you?
Agreed. Well, not so silent.
Cheers, guys. Till next time.
Hell yeah.
Rock and roll, Cujo.